Erin McClelland, a Democrat for State Treasurer of Pennsylvania. Why are you running for this office?
A whole new vision for it. I think that the way we've done it, there's a lot more opportunity to do some really advanced work and bring it into the 21st century, things like cybersecurity, addressing our supply chain, looking at how even we do unclaimed properties return. I think that the way we look at it is very antiquated, and for the 21st century, we need to bring it in to a more modernized approach. So that's some of the things that I've been trained on, I'm very passionate about, and I think this office has the opportunity to deliver far more for the people of Pennsylvania than it ever has. We just need somebody in there with a vision to do it.
So the Office of Treasurer often doesn't get the same attention as other offices. So can you tell me why this should be important to Pennsylvanians?
Sure. I would say that the number one issue is this is your $163 billion. It is filled by the workers of this state off the sweat of their brow. How are we managing it? What are we doing with it? You have pension funds in there, 3 of them, that this person is managing, as well as savings accounts like 529 and PA Able. But on top of that, this is the person that does your state contracts and records those. So if you really want to dive into that database and see how we're spending our money, this is the heart of transparency. This is the person that sees every dollar. The question is, what do you relay back to the people of Pennsylvania about what you're seeing in those dollars? And I want to make it more transparent than it's ever been.
So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the job. In other words, the basic responsibilities. Start with the biggest one. You got to write checks, don't you?
You do. You have to put the checks out there, and modernizing that process, considering that check fraud is the number one fraud that you see in banking fraud. So that's something I want to dive into, look at how we're doing that, not just at the state level, but helping our municipalities, because that is the number one form of fraud that we see. So looking how we're paying our bills and getting bills paid back to us is very important.
What kind of possible changes occur to you right now?
Well, so right now, moving everything to a full ACH process, which is much safer.
What kind of process? Better say that again and say it slower.
An ACH, debit process, where you're not actually handwriting a check, dropping it in the mail, and putting it out there. So that would be something that we would want to do to modernize, and as well as providing support to our, I believe, 2,559 municipalities to help them modernize their systems too. The resources, the information, and the general sophistication that it takes to run a treasury with $163 billion is also a gift that we can give to support those municipalities and bring them into the 21st century. And I live in a Class 1 township. I know how difficult it is. A lot of those electeds often do this work out of the goodness of their heart. They're not usually paid. They don't have a lot of resources to bring in CTOs and cybersecurity experts. So the Treasury can use those resources to provide support to those municipal electeds. And it's certainly not a partisan issue to them or me.
Now, just for a minute, let's consider the responsibilities of Auditor General. And now that person is considered the financial watchdog over state funds. So it occurs to me that there's got to be some interaction between the Treasurer Office and Auditor General.
Sure. There's going to be interaction between all 3 of your row offices if they work cohesively, which is really, really important. And furthermore, now that the Supreme Court has done so much to dismantle administrative government. They've disempowered the EPA, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the National Labor Relations Board. That means that that's going to come on the states, very much like Roe v. Wade. When the Supreme Court says, all right, federal government's not going to do that anymore, it became part of the state government. And we're going to see a lot more of those administrative responsibilities fall on your row offices. So I think that you need not just an innovative, outside-the-box thinker that has an understanding of how you operate in a modern economy and a modern infrastructure in the Treasurer's office, but in the Auditor General as well as the Attorney General's office. And hopefully you have 3 people in there that can work together and be very innovative about how we protect the people.
Now, before we go any farther, Erin, and consider the issues that are going to come up in this race, let's consider your background and your experience. So let's just start with the present. What do you do for a living right now?
Right now, I'm campaigning full time. We're running all over the state. I am currently on an 8-day road trip that started last Wednesday. I will finally go home and, do some.
What is your goal? Visit all the counties in Pennsylvania?
As many as I possibly can. Not just the counties. I am really spending a lot of time with municipal electeds. This week I am right now working with the authorities convention in Hershey. So talking to people that are doing water and sewage, the municipal water supply of Aliquippa was hacked by Iran. So these are very serious conversations that I'm having with these electeds that run these organizations that are very important to our infrastructure. And I'm learning a lot about the challenges they're facing and really having great discussions about how the Treasury can be more impactful in their work.
So what were you doing before you turned all your attention full-time towards this campaign?
I spent 9 years doing policy and process improvement for Allegheny County. Before that, I ran...
Give me some examples of what kind of work you did, Erin.
Sure. We designed a root cause racism program to start to cut back on the amount of racial discrimination suits. When I look at work-related injury, work-related death, they're very expensive. We lose money on turnover, on retention, on recruitment, as well as lawsuits. And any corporation knows that. Any steel mill knows that. You walk into any steel mill in Pennsylvania, particularly in Allegheny County, and you usually see something somewhere that says, it's been this many days since a work-related injury. Well, racial discrimination, sexual harassment, these kind of things in the public sector workplace are loss leaders. So when we started seeing a number of exit interviews coming in with people of color saying that they felt very discriminated against, and they were articulating some pretty harsh things, we designed a root cause racism program. We completely rebuilt the performance management system, and then started working on a merit system to replace the current civil service system. So operating within big government systems is something I'm very familiar with, and making them better.
Now, you spent a significant part of your life being a counselor, I understand, for 15 years. What kind of counselor?
I was in the drug and alcohol mental health treatment industry for about 18 years. Started out just counseling and then worked my way up and eventually started my own program. Got $2 million in venture funding for that. And we were the first of its kind licensed in the state and got featured twice in Industrial Engineer magazine for using process improvement techniques and lean systems to improve the way we treat the human condition. The idea was not just medicating people and putting them in a room to talk about it, but when you see somebody that is in the throes of addiction, you can see real physical turmoil. You see physical health problems. It's not just in your head. So we worked a lot to address that dynamic.
So why change fields, Erin, from human services and, like you put it, examining the human condition, and then working your way up to running for statewide office?
I didn't change fields at all.
No?
No, not at all. I started working in...
I'm sensing a segue from the human condition to administration. That's what I think I'm hearing from you.
Yes. When you're running any large government system, especially one working with your money, the system is only as good as the people operating it. So one thing that I learned in working in mental health and drug and alcohol, when you're counseling people, I learned how impactful bad experiences and bad leadership in a workplace were and how it affected them. And I've always been dedicated because of my union background, 4 generations of labor in my family, and I live in a steel town, on the idea of making workplaces rewarding for people and a place that leads and rewards bold and creative thought. And when you work in nonprofits, and particularly the public sector, you don't see as much of that. So whenever I sort of went beyond the next step, I wasn't counseling anymore. I had run a clinic, and I wanted to get more into supporting the workforce that does that work.
I see.
So, I didn't want to be on the front line. I'd done that for a long time. I wanted to start supporting the other people. So I went to Allegheny County Department of Human Services, helping CYF caseworkers and Area Agency on Aging caseworkers, supporting their work, and seeing really the money that we waste in government because we aren't running good government systems with leadership, with good workplace standards. We're not always giving people the resources they need. Sometimes they can be very toxic. And when you look at that, following the money is very important. And Paul O'Neill, the former Treasury Secretary, taught me that. When he was at Treasury, he saw that the loss leader in healthcare was medical error. Hurting people was the biggest contributor to rising costs in Medicare and Medicaid. Because every time you injure somebody, suddenly what was a $10,000 hospital visit becomes a $250,000 hospital visit. And the way
because someone made a mistake?
Yeah, sure. If you're injuring somebody, you're making somebody sicker, you're messing up a surgery. Yeah, you're looking at costing. And then, if you end up with a lawsuit because of what happened, it gets even worse. So he dedicated his career to that. And when I met him, he was doing that kind of work with the Jewish Healthcare Foundation and the Pittsburgh Regional Healthcare Initiative. And my organization started working with him. And I thought, wow, isn't it innovative that he was working in the U.S. Treasury, and that led him to identify one issue that he thought was the biggest loss leader in government, and he spent the rest of his career trying to resolve that. So I feel that I've followed the same career path. This is just where it led me.
Well, at the beginning of our show, you mentioned a few of your agenda priorities, and one of them was working on cybersecurity. And we know that periodically it comes up in the headlines. We hear about a major organization that's been hacked. Information's been compromised. What would you change there?
Yeah, we actually dropped a cybersecurity program during the primary that was picked up in the press. It is available on my website. But basically, when you look at the Municipal Water Authority of Aliquippa being hacked by Iran, and the reason for that, they were targeted because they were using an Israeli-made software system.
And we were able to trace that to Iran. Isn't that amazing?
That is correct. And they were using a default password that came with the system that they were using, and it was 1111. And what I have found
don't use that or password 123.
Yeah, exactly. But what I've found is when I'm spending so much time with the municipal electeds, and they said, just tell us what we need to do. Give us an alert system, give us, and create top of mind awareness. Workplace safety, what we teach you is when you go into a meeting, the first thing you should do is say, okay, if there's an emergency, here's where the exits are, here's where the fire extinguisher is, here's where the first aid is, and here's where your life-sustaining care is. In cybersecurity, we don't do that. We don't start our municipal meetings with, all right, I want to give you what's going on with our cyber. We've talked to our bank. We've talked to our insurance company. We are changing our passwords. We are storing them here. There should be a protocol that is implemented on a daily basis. It should be top of mind. And that's where I'm really going to have to start, is creating an organizational culture of safety, not just physical safety for workers, but safety for the people's assets. And the lack of safety that we see at the municipal level, that needs to be built up, or we're going to be in serious trouble financially as we're paying out these attacks and losing money.
Some of our viewers are familiar with the Treasurer's Office through this program that involves unclaimed property, which whenever that phrase comes up, it seems to bring about a certain amount of excitement to it because people like to think that there's something waiting for them. Now, you mentioned that, and so and for those of our viewers who don't know about it, tell us what that program is and what kind of changes you might have in mind.
Yeah. So when, let's say you have a bank account that hasn't been touched for a very long time, or somebody passes away and for whatever reason family haven't commandeered control of that, that could be turned over to the state. Or a check that you didn't cash from perhaps an insurance company, that could be turned over to the state.
And there it sits for how long?
Well, that's the question. That is the $10 million question there, because we don't really know. What we know is every treasurer comes out and says, oh, we returned this much in unclaimed property. My question is, and we are in the 21st century. So just going around saying I gave back money, well, yeah, that's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. And by the way, it wasn't your money. It was somebody else's. So I don't really consider that something that you should be patting yourself on the back for. That is the job. What I would like to do is say the average cycle time from the moment a dollar comes in that belongs to somebody else to the time it gets out. What is that time? I imagine there is unclaimed property in there that has been there for years, if not decades. And the question is, what do we do with that? I want to get it. We are in the 21st century. It is time for a real-time delivery system to the point where the Treasury is not a holding center. It is a pass-through. We lost sight of you in this bank. We lost sight of you in this insurance company. But here, it's coming to the Treasury. Let's get it in the door, process where it goes, and get it right back out. I want a zero holding time. That's the theoretical limit. That's what a modern economy should be delivering, and that's what we should be working on in the Treasury. And that's not how it's being done.
Here's another issue in the Treasury, and it has to do with something called Keystone Saves. It's a retirement savings program. I know you have a position on that, but first, tell us what it is.
They're calling it a retirement program. I don't think that any program that prohibits an employer from putting money in is a retirement. That's some sort of savings account. A retirement program allows the employer to participate in that process. This program does not. It's a program that the current treasurer is pushing. It would be mandated on every small business in the state that doesn't currently offer a retirement program. I don't think it's a good replacement for lack of a retirement program. It is completely unregulated. The product, there's only one product in it. There's not multiple savings or 401ks or IRAs in there to give you a choice. There's one product in there, and that is a self-directed IRA. In February of last year, the Securities and Exchange Commission put out a 4-page alert, a fraud alert on self-directed IRAs. Basically, maybe they were created with the best of intention, but Wall Street has turned them into a cesspool of loss and deprivation. The idea of mandating this on bars, restaurants, coffee shops, and telling bartenders and baristas and frontline workers, oh, this is a good idea. No, this is a fraud-ridden program. It is self-directed by nature, which means you decide. The language in the bill actually says that the worker, the participant, can't contact the fund manager, so you have no control. I think it is completely absurd. I have not found anybody in the investment community that advises on this. We have our own plan that does have a 401k, which would allow an employer to contribute. So, there's a bar down the street that has really great chicken wings, and I go in and I talk to Mark, the owner, and I said, Mark, if you had this program and let's say you had a good profit at the end of the year, would you put money into your workers? Absolutely. I would put money into a retirement. If we had a good year and had profits to share, I would. But he can't do that with the Keystone Saves program. The other thing that it does is it requires every business to disclose all their workers' identification to the Treasury. There's no reason for that. That is completely an overreach of power that Stacey Garrity is advocating for. And it's starting to look like she wants to operationalize immigration control out of the Treasury when you look at how it's designed. And that is way outside the purview of what the Treasury...
Did you say operationalize? Tell me more about that.
If you are mandating all this information about workers, but there's no reason for that. There's absolutely no reason that a retirement program should mandate we know identifying information for every worker. So I started looking into how it was designed, and my concern is that she's actually looking for undocumented workers and plans on addressing that through the Treasury. And that's just, we don't have the resources for that. There's other more important things the Treasury is responsible for that we need to be doing. So I'm a little alarmed by the entire program from top to bottom.
Is there anything else the current state treasurer is doing that you want to come out against?
Oh, absolutely. She is an obsession with putting state money in foreign investments. And not long after she came into office, she signed an agreement with Bank of New York Mellon to invest our teachers' pension in the Saudi Arabian stock exchange. That is completely irrational.
If that promises a good return, why not do it?
Well, Russian bonds are promising a 13% return. I'm not investing in those either. The Saudi Arabian stock exchange is primarily capitalized by Aramco. That is the state-owned oil company of Saudi Arabia. It's worth about $4 trillion. The primary profiteer of that organization is the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. This is somebody that likes to murder and dismember reporters. And right now, we have the 9/11 Justice Organization, which is still in a lawsuit with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, suing them for accountability for helping to plan and fund the 9/11 attacks.
So there's a serious ethical component to making investments.
I would agree. And there is absolutely no way I would be putting money into that stock exchange. I mean, if you want to put money into oil, we have plenty of oil companies here. Put it into BP, put it into Exxon. To put it into Aramco and the Saudi Arabian stock exchange, that's unlike anything I've ever seen. And that's a teacher's pension. That's not even the state fund. That is our teacher's pension. And they've definitely had enough problems with that fund. A Department of Justice investigation, defunding the program for years through the state legislature. And now we're going to go at it again with investments in Saudi Arabia. I highly disagree with that.
Well, I'm glad we got into this because earlier you pointed out the treasurer has $163 billion to work with. And after all, investments have to be made. And why not talk about the basic way the decisions are made to make investments?
I don't know how the current
treasurer...
treasurer...
Are there rules, I wonder? I
mean, there's some, but for the most part, so on the boards, on the pensions, you have boards that actually have those conversations. But in a lot of the funds, there's some basic rules. But for the most part, unless there's a ban on investing in certain countries, which we do have, for the most part, there's the treasurer has carte blanche. And so when you're looking at the Israeli bond investment, I wouldn't put money into Russian bonds, and they're at 13%. I wouldn't put them into Israeli bonds either. With war bonds in particular, you have to remember you're funding a war, which means you keep issuing new bonds. With each new bond, you're raising the interest rate, which means I think there's been, I think it's 3 bond issues for Israeli bonds since we bought in. Well, those interest rates are going up, which means the opportunity cost to hold on to that first bond is worse because now people that are coming into the investment, they're getting a higher interest rate than we're getting. War bonds are unstable. If you look at the credit downgrade that countries will often see whenever they're taking on large amount of debts in order to fund a war, the Israeli prime minister finance minister, has not been very open about what the plan is to stabilize the economics of the country, including the worker strikes that we've seen there in protest of judicial reforms. These are all indicators that I would look at when I'm looking at an investment. How is their credit? I mean, Moody's, Fitch's, S&P, they have a rating system. So they're giving us some baseline data on how they're looking at these countries whenever they're investing in them, especially when they're going into debt. So I would definitely look at that. It wouldn't be the end all be all. But if you're looking at a credit rating, you're looking at workforce strikes. When you're looking at a massive public sector workforce strike across the entire nation of Israel, that is an alarm for somebody like me. That shows pretty systemic destabilization. So those are all things that I would look at. The Jewish Chronicle in Pittsburgh did do an article on this and compared my stance with the current treasurers. And I made it very clear that this was in no way, shape, or form questioning Israel's right to exist. This was simply a pragmatic look at how we invest the people's money. My opponent could not articulate the criteria that she used to make that investment and simply felt that it is the obligation of the state coffers to fund democracy.
And you mentioned news articles just a minute ago, Erin, so I'd like to consider your campaign. And there's been an element of controversy about that. Let me tell you what the Penn Capital Star reported, that you raised and spent campaign donations before officially becoming a candidate. Election experts say you're not supposed to do that.
Well, you can call the Attorney General's office because they looked at everything, as did the Bureau of Campaign Finance, and we were absolved of everything that the Penn Capital Star accused us of. Furthermore, I provided all of the communication that we had with the state to the Penn Capital Star. We were in constant contact with them. They emailed us regularly and said, no, we're all good. You've done everything you need. Everything's fine. The communication on our filings before we filed was included. The Penn Capital Star chose to not include any of that information. That was a hit piece. And anybody that cites it, I say, you are more than welcome to call the Attorney General. We handed over all documentation, including bank statements and copies of checks. We were absolved of any wrongdoing.
Let's talk some more about the campaign, even not this particular campaign, but you're no stranger to campaigning because I know you ran for Congress before.
Yeah.
And tell us briefly about that experience.
Yeah, so in 2014 and 16, first there was the real gerrymandering of the districts in 2012, and I always had a Democratic member of Congress, so all of a sudden this changed. That was also the surgence of the Tea Party, which was campaigning aggressively against the Affordable Care Act. They were going to repeal it, defund it, shut it down. That was sort of the mentality there. But third, the Democratic Party was really starting to lose working class voters. And I live in a steel town. And it alarmed me to see people around me who were lifelong Democrats, who were steel workers, starting to move to the Republican side. And I didn't understand why. And that was a big reason that I got in that race. Johnstown was in that district, the Alakiski Valley, Aliquippa. There were all these great steel towns along rivers, river towns in it. And I just identified so much with it. And I wanted to make that argument, even though it was like an R11 district, so it was largely considered unwinnable. I felt that making an argument to working people from somebody that had that background was really important. And I will say, we've kind of opened up our eyes on that when Joe Biden really did a lot to improve that in these towns. So we're working our way back from that. But that was a big part of why I did that race.
And what lessons did you learn, Erin, from those campaigns back then for Congress that you can apply to this treasurer race that you're in right now?
I learned that the biggest mistake that we made as Democrats is we were constantly telling voters that we were right. And when Donald Trump came on the scene and was running in 2016, he was telling voters that the voters were right. that was the biggest difference I saw. And that was a big part of how I approached politics after that race is, you have to meet people where they are. And I learned that as a therapist. If you have somebody in front of you who's telling you that, drugs or anything that they're doing is working for them, you have to meet them where they are. You can't just tell them, well, you're wrong and I'm right and this isn't going to work. You would be the most unsuccessful therapist there is. If you truly want to persuade people, you have to listen. You have to give them unconditional positive regard and have a conversation. And I think we're doing much better at that than we were back then. And I'm enjoying that. And I think that my opponent is very much, she's an election denier. She, said that the election was fraudulent, which was interesting because that was an election that she won in. So I don't really know how that works. But she has largely been highly critical of any of the reforms Joe Biden has done. She has not demonstrated that there's a single thing he's done that she agrees with. And she's been very bad on inflation. So those are the things that I've learned is really meeting people where they are and understanding common ground.
Now we just have a few minutes left, Erin. So it occurs to me, for a person who's aspiring to an office that oversees, again, $163 billion, what can the Auditor General's office do to help Pennsylvanians achieve their own private financial security? It sounds like you're in a position to give some advice.
Yeah, the Treasurer's office. I don't know how much of that we do now, but definitely doing Finance 101 for women and girls is something that I'm very big on. We are encouraging in the state to do savings. What I do encourage people to do is savings is great, but not if you're paying a fortune in debt every month. So come up with a realistic debt strategy to get yourself out of debt. Second of all, instead of paying everything equally, focus on your lowest debt, the least amount of money. If you have a debt that's $2,000, $1,000, and $500, get rid of the $500 off the bat, and then take that extra money and put it into the other two. That usually people tell you to go after the highest interest rate first, but data has shown that if you eliminate payments and you can sink it all into less amount of payments a month, you're going to be better off. So those are just the few things that I recommend, but definitely helping women and girls find financial independence and understanding that, maybe a savings bond over a Louis Vuitton is a much better investment.
We have just a minute left, Erin, so why not use that time and tell our viewers why they should vote for you?
Well, first of all, I have consented to at least 2 different debates. Dennis Owens from Harrisburg offered a debate. City and State offered a debate. My opponent is refusing to debate. I will be going into the Philadelphia Inquirer next week to interview for their endorsement. She has also declined that interview. I want to make an argument to the people. Stacey Garrity's very busy getting ready to run for governor next year against Josh Shapiro. That's what a lot of her time is focused on. So she's not really interested in the office. She's made that clear. I was at the municipalities this week, and she's not there talking to them, really engaging them. She has some people from her office. She should be there. So I don't think she really cares about this office. She's looking at running for governor. She's not making an argument. As a matter of fact, I think she's trying to hide from some of the things that she's done. She's not going to do a debate, and she's hoping to coast by. Let's not do that. I want this job right here, right now, and there's a lot I want to do with it. So I hope the people will support me.
Erin McClelland, Democrat for State Treasurer of Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Thank you.